There are reasons that you have to justify it. What must never be a reason is I'm afraid somebody's going to throw a bomb into the newsroom. I'm afraid that if we do this, we're going to be attacked directly and so on. Because that isn't an editorial decision. That then is an act of self-censorship. Self-censorship is entirely driven by fear. Fear of the consequences of what you do. Good editorial decisions, these are decisions that are motivated by a good understanding of journalism and what is necessary for the journalism that you produce, for the audience that you serve. It's important to try to sort of see where the differences are. And I think that we have seen much more self-censorship than actually a lot of media, particularly in Europe, are willing to admit to. And I think this is a problem. And I think we should be more open about that sort of security concern. Finally, and probably the most important challenge for journalism, is slow journalism. Because all of the things I've talked about require thinking. You need to sit back, you need to reflect. You need to think, what are the consequences of this? How do we work? Is this the right thing to do? We need to consult more. We need to consult internally more. Journalists need to talk with one another about it. We need to sort of have more contact with our audience, have a sort of better understanding. The rush to publish is not an ethical principle. It's not a matter of journalistic ethics that you have to publish everything as quickly as possible before anyone else. That's a market principle. That's entirely sort of based upon beating the competition and so on. It's not an ethical principle of journalism. And we see when we fail to think, fail to sit back and think, then we make serious errors. So how do we develop a system of slower journalism? Of course, everybody is moved by the social network. We're all sort of being driven by what's trending and what's not trending and so on. But we have to recognise that journalism is not open internet information and so on and so forth. There's a distinction. I open my computer, I can sort of say what I want, I can put in what I want on my blog. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry if it's true. I don't have to worry about it if it's offensive. I don't have to worry if it deeply offends other groups. I don't even have to say who I am. I can pretend to be somebody else. I certainly don't have to say sorry for anything that I do, because that's free expression. The right to be able to do that is fantastically liberating, and I can do it as quickly as I want without any worries about it. That's free expression. It's only limited by the general law, but it's not journalism. Because journalism is, as we know, is information communicated in a framework of values. And we all know here what those values are. It's very straightforward. I've talked a bit about them. Accuracy. You know, we're not deceptive in our handling of the facts. We have to be accurate. Independence. We're not there to be the spokesperson for a political party or a political group and so on. We're supposed to be independent. Impartial. We're supposed to recognise that there's more than one side of a story. Very often there's more than two sides of the story. We have to make sure all of those sort of sides are represented. Fourthly, humanity. We have to be aware of the consequences of the words we use and the images we use, that they can have an impact, they have consequences. So that's another principle. And fifthly, and it's the one that's most difficult for all journalists I've ever known, is accountability. The capacity to say sorry, to admit that you make a mistake. Humility is not our strong point, but it actually is one of our ethical obligations, that we have to correct our errors and we have to be more open about what we do. So that's what makes journalism different from free expression on the internet and so on. And we shouldn't be dictated to by people who try to say everybody is a journalist today, everybody can say what they want and so on. Journalism is nearly fine. The things we're talking about today seem to me to reveal more than ever something I've been convinced about for a number of years, and long before I left the IFJ, which is that we need journalism, good journalism, ethical journalism, more than we've ever needed it since the Second World War. In my view, it's absolutely fundamental. People yearn to have access to information they can trust. And building that public trust in the work that journalists do is the really most important thing that we have, and that's why I'm grateful. And when it was suggested that we have this discussion, that it gives an opportunity to reaffirm that principle.
Well, there's time for more questions? Can I give some wonderful? Yeah.
Sorry, I came in late. But we have an Arab League, foreign ministers here, and foreign ministers discussing with the EU foreign ministers. And you mentioned it. I may have missed it before, but also just isolated facts. So you mentioned the blogger, the Saudi blogger who's being lashed. But we saw also photos of a woman being decapitated in the street in Saudi Arabia. And that foreign minister is here now talking to our foreign ministers. I was wondering what kind of message can we send to those states which, I don't know how we can differentiate Saudi Arabia, but it's legitimised.
And I think absolutely. There's a story that's current about religion and free expression. That's clear. The Charlie Hebdo events are part of it. The terrible killings of the Jewish people in the supermarket is part of it. The Pope's comment is part of it. The flogging of the Saudi blogger is part of it. I think these are legitimate areas for questioning by journalists. And I think it's right for journalists to pose these questions. Is this, are we talking, can we have a sort of political relationship which is not based upon sort of respect for human rights and basic values? And does free expression come into play as an issue to be discussed when the European Union or member states of the European Union are making agreements, political agreements or trade agreements with countries like Saudi Arabia? I think this is an absolutely valid area for questioning by journalists. Because I think we have to raise the contradictions. We have to sort of raise. It's clear any sentient person looking at what's going on will say, well, what the hell is happening here? The Pope saying this, in Saudi they're doing this, there's blasphemy laws that sort of at work here, and it's business as usual in the sort of in the trade dialogues and so on. There are contradictions here which I think, as journalists, we can legitimately question.